Okay. So they get me back there and they keep me on the morphine until the next day. And the next day, you know, when I'm not on painkillers, I'm still in an immense amount of pain. My doctor comes in. She's upset because nobody called her. Someone had to be like, oh yeah, your patient's surgical ward, blah blah blah. And she's like, what are you talking about? So she comes down to see me. Come to find out, I have an infection in my abdomen. Um, it's not a large one, but it's big enough. I'm spiking temperatures, uncontrollable temperatures of 104 and greater. I got all the way up to I think 104.5 or 6. So, and they had to put me on cooling blankets. They were pumping me full of Tylenol and it wasn't working. They had me on antibiotics, all types of antibiotics to try to see if they would work. I had ice packs on me. Just the fever was not being controlled at all. It just wouldn't control itself. They tried. So she's like, we're gonna try to fight this with antibiotics. We don't know exactly what we're fighting, but we're gonna try to fight it with antibiotics to see if it will go on its own. So I'm in the hospital. This is the baby's at home with my parents. And sorry, it's so much to remember. So for the first 3 days of me being in the hospital, I think they tried to fight it with antibiotics on its own to get it to go away, and that wasn't working. And I remember them coming in there either the 4th or 5th day and saying they were going to go in and do surgery. So they went back in, they cut me open again through the bikini line incision of the C-section, and of course there was an infection. They removed it, they washed me out, they cleaned me out, sent a sample of it over to the lab to see what it was, and I go into recovery. And at this point, I'd been in the hospital for a week, I think, already. I'd only seen the baby once, and that was before I went into surgery, I think, or it might have been after. I only got to see him for 30 minutes. So at this point, I had only seen my son. My son was already 2 weeks old, and I'd only seen him 4 days out of those 2 weeks. Then they came back, the test results came back, and I had I'm not even going to try to say the big name, but it's basically a form of strep. It's group D strep. It's a rare infection from what they said, but from what I've looked up on the internet, it's not that rare. They say they don't know how I got it, but from my understanding, the hospital that I delivered at was not the cleanest, and I'm almost positive that I got it from the hospital. I'm not blaming the doctor. I'm not blaming my doctor at all. I love my doctor, but I do think that I contracted it from the hospital itself, because I don't know how else I would have contracted it. And from what they say, from what I've researched on the infection itself, it's a bacteria that comes from your intestines, and it's an intestinal bacteria. And I don't know if maybe when they were cleaning me from the C-section, some meconium got left behind. but I don't know. I don't know how I got it, but I got it, and it made me really sick. So after they cleaned me out, my white blood cell count started to go down, and then it spiked back up. And they had to give me more CTs, more x-rays, and there was fluid in my abdomen again. And they didn't know if it was old blood or if it was the infection. But they left it alone for a few days to see if, maybe it would go away on its own and the antibiotics would fight it. In the meantime, I start throwing up. I start throwing up massive amounts of bile. At first it wasn't very much, and then I got up to 1,000 cc's of bile at one time. So imagine one of those saline bags. I could fill up a whole thing of that with bile, just throwing it up. So they decided to put a NG tube down my nose. It went from my nose into my stomach, and it drained everything, because otherwise I would have just kept throwing up. And they gave me a stomach x-ray, and I had an ileus, which basically meant my bowels were paralyzed and they were just asleep. And so the doctor was like, okay, we're gonna see, which is common, that's a common complication from surgery, from abdominal surgery, is your bowels go to sleep. They just say, hey, no, we're not gonna work. And hopefully they wake up on their own, but in my case, that wasn't happening. They gave me a few days to get them to wake up on their own, and they weren't. I was just getting worse. So and the fluid looked bigger, I guess. So they went back in, and what happened was I had a violin string of, I don't know what, just the string of skin or scar tissue, and I had adhesions that was cutting off anything from going out and coming in. So everything it would get to a certain point, and then I'd throw it back up because it couldn't go any further, and then nothing could go out. So that's why I wasn't having any bowel movements. So I had a bowel obstruction. So the surgeon went in and he fixed that. The fluid that they had seen on the CT was not infection. It was just old blood and stuff from the previous surgery. And this time they didn't cut me the bikini, like they had to create a whole new incision. So that was fun. So they fixed that, and then after 2 or 3 days my bowel started working again. And then after 2 weeks, this all took place over a 2-week period. After 2 weeks of being in the hospital, they finally let me go. So in 3 weeks I had 3 major surgeries, and in the first 3 weeks of my son's life I only got to see him 5 days. So that really, 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 really sucked. And I try not to be upset about it, but that's just how it ended up. So any of you ladies who are pregnant now, if you have a C-section and you at all feel funny or different or sick after, go to the doctor. Don't wait, because I waited, and I think I could have avoided all those surgeries if I would have been like, hey, something's up, instead of just, oh, it's just hormones, oh, it's just this, oh, it's just that. So that's my after labor and delivery story. But now I do get to spend time with him. I don't get to do everything that I wish I could do. I don't get to, I can't get up with him all the time. I can't do all these things that, other new mommies can do. Let me stop this and make the third part.